Welcome to Humanist Views, a program where we look at current issues from a humanist point of view. I'm Scott Lohman. On tonight's program, we're going to take a look at sort of the art of storytelling and going back deep into human history, since storytelling is one of the early skills that we humans had, because after a long day on the savannah hunting things, you're stuck with a fire, and what else are you going to do but tell stories and go to bed early? So this goes back a long ways, and as well as the human ability to put themselves into the world to sort of make up for those things that we hadn't quite figured out yet. So tonight we're going to talk about mythology and then how you can have fun with it in fiction. My guest tonight is Aimee Kuzenski.
Hi.
Welcome, Aimee. Aimee is an author, and you're also a technical writer and a number of other things.
Yes, I have quite a varied background.
Okay, but the reason I want to have you on tonight is you've got a new book that just came out.
I do. It's called Eye of the Storm.
Grab a copy quick, just bring it up.
Right here. It's a modern fantasy about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. It's planned to be the first in a series, and the first one centers on war, set in West Point.
Okay, so you're taking some classic characters of mythology. So we'll get back to that, but let's first talk, what got you interested in mythology?
I honestly can't even remember the first time I discovered it. I remember being at my grandmother's house, and she always took us to the library, and I would check out over and over and over the same book on Greek and Roman myths. And I memorized them. I thought they were fascinating. So it started there, and the more I learn about different pantheons, different mythologies, the more interested I got.
Yeah, because it's got to be fascinating, especially once you get past being a believer in some of those. So were you raised as a believer in a certain religion or any?
I was. I grew up in the Wisconsin Synod Lutheran Church.
Okay.
And I never had any terrible experiences with it, but I do remember feeling that there was just a lot that was unexplained, a lot of contradictory things, and then I remember the breaking point. I was sitting in a service, and the sermon was about how women were worth less than men, and that was the end of it. I never went back.
Yeah, especially in the Wisconsin Synod, because I think, if memory serves me, they still don't allow women to vote on church issues.
That's my memory, yes.
Okay, yeah, we could be wrong on that. Somebody could correct us, but yeah, there was one in my hometown, and that one was always interesting to go to. So then, but you're always checking on the Greek and Roman myths. What's fascinating to you about those?
I think the most fascinating thing to me was how human they were. It's almost like reading a soap opera.
Mm-hmm.
There's, betrayals of lovers and spats and grudges and ridiculous things you have to do to make up to one god or the other in order to get through the day. There's convoluted, arbitrary rules, and it very often had a moral that, whether or not I approved of it, I found it really interesting that that's how they chose to communicate things. Rather than just giving you a set of rules, they gave you a story.
Yeah, or the one God on high issuing edicts for those of us to go by. So yeah, it does sound a lot more fun. I always found those a lot more fascinating than the Christian pantheon, especially since you had the mix of both genders that Christianity is missing in its Godhead.
Exactly. I've found that there are quite a variety of women characters in mythology, especially if you step outside of the Western mythologies like Greek and Roman. You get into Celtic mythology or Native American mythology. You get a whole rainbow of characters that speak to people in a way they resonate because they represent archetypes. That's one of the things that makes them such great storytelling fodder, is that by invoking one character, you're invoking everything that it's associated with, like Hercules. You associate with strength, with the inability to hold drink. He abused his wife and kids. In order to make up for this, he had to do the labors of Hercules, and the flushing of the Aegean stables, and the Gordian knot, and all those other things. So it's fascinating to me to be able to just say one word and have all of that background just filled in. It's almost like writing fan fiction.
Well, yep, there you go. Because yeah, that's where you get into all sorts of fascinating things, and we'll
Exactly.
save that for another program because that gets complicated.
It does.
Especially when we bring in slash, which we'll make people Google that one. And be careful, don't do it at work. Just a warning.
Safe search.
Safe search, yes, on that part. So then, do you enjoy reading fiction that uses mythological characters, or do you read like more urban fantasy, or?
I kind of read all over the place. I don't just stay in genre. I'll read a lot of thrillers, horror. I'll read some literature, even some nonfiction, although it's not really my favorite thing. But I love reading stories that are based on mythology. Not only do I find the stories fascinating, the characters fascinating, but again feel like I love seeing what people do with them. One of my favorite examples is American Gods by Neil Gaiman,
Okay.
where he brings in not only the old gods, but new gods that were created by Americans.
Oh, cool.
And it's an interesting way of looking at mythology where rather than the gods creating us, we created them. It's kind of how I feel about the Bible,
There
honestly.
you go. Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, we sort of, created those stories to do a variety of things. So why did you want to start with one of the sort of biggies in there with the four horsemen of the apocalypse?
Well, it's actually kind of a long story. I planned on doing a novel for National Novel Writing Month,
Okay.
NaNoWriMo, and I sat down at work. I was at a trade show, and I had nothing to do, and I was in a terrible mood. I didn't like my job at the time, and just sat down with a notebook and started writing this character that didn't have to take all of the stuff that I was taking. And I sat down, I probably wrote about 3,000 words just in one sitting.
Wow.
And that was the beginning of the book. A lot has changed since then, as it normally
course.
does. But the voice of the character is still there, and that always makes me happy.
It's good when you can keep on what inspired you to do that. So,
Exactly.
yeah, and Mars has been portrayed a number of different ways.
Right.
Are you familiar with? I'm blank. It's the guy who created Xanth, Piers Anthony.
Yes.
His series, where he then took mythology as well and used Mars in there.
That's the Incarnations of Immortality
Yes.
series, and actually that was something I loved those books when I was younger. I've kind of grown out of them, but I very strongly remember reading the first few of them, and I thought he had an interesting way of looking at it. He again was looking at the old stories through a modern lens.
Yes.
And that's what I wanted to do here, but I wanted to make sure that my world wasn't exactly like anybody else's. I mean,
yeah.
I certainly didn't want to do that. So I thought of, well, what if the gods are in this world, what are they doing? And my first thought for War was that he would be an arms dealer, of course.
There you go.
One way or the other, selling or buying, it doesn't really matter to him.
And it doesn't to the ones in real life either.
Certainly doesn't. Certainly doesn't. And there are more than just the four horsemen in my series. I've got Greek gods, Roman gods, Celtic gods. I make mention of Egyptian and Sumerian deities. So I tried to pick and choose from everywhere while still staying with something that I was culturally familiar with, so I wouldn't sound off key.
Yes.
It fascinated me, these characters that I could look at and think, well, what would he be like? What would he be doing? Why is he here? And of course, it was pretty obvious to me that he had to be at West Point. Why wouldn't he?
There you go. Yeah.
Someplace calm enough to have a nice house, but he still had a very military air around him.
So is he? So doing that. So what's just sort of a quick overview of your storyline?
The quick overview is War is tricked into destroying his modern persona. And he has to quickly figure out how to put a stopgap to any upcoming issues and find and take care of whoever tricked him into doing this. So what he decides to do is, rather than scramble around and just try to catch up, he decides to take a completely new tactic and try to modernize himself. And the way he decides to do this is to take over the body of a female lieutenant at West Point.
Ooh, okay.
Unfortunately for her, she is still stuck in her head with him in control, and she's not very happy about it.
No, that definitely would not be a good situation.
They do eventually strike a truce and go off looking for the person, and turns out to be an immortal who started the whole problem. And while there are several battle scenes, he in the end decides to take it to his family, or the pantheon of gods, to have a decision made about who gets what.
Ooh, so that does sound like fun, because you've got lots of inbuilt conflict and stuff going on that.
Yes.
Now, the thing is you were in a neat panel at Convergence, which is a science fiction convention that's held here in the summer, and we were talking about atheists, writers, and atheist themed things. And the thing I've always noticed is that atheists do better at writing supernatural than people who believe in it. And I think it's the simple reason that it's because we don't believe in it, we're going to make sure we set it up so that it actually works in terms of our story.
Right, I agree. There's no sacred cow.
Yeah.
If you want to use a cliche, because I have no personal investment as to what's true and what's not, so I can change whatever I need to as long as it's internally consistent. That's my big deal. It doesn't really matter to me what's traditionally true, although I prefer to stick within that as much as possible, because again, that will make it resonate more with the readers.
Yep, especially since you've already got that character set up.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that works well, because I've noticed that there's a number of writers like Joss Whedon and a number of others who have created really fascinating supernatural structures, but don't believe an iota of anything beyond the human part of it.
Right.
And so that's got to help when you're just grabbing characters to play with.
Exactly. One scene later on in the book where I bring in more of the family members, I had a great time leaving a lot unsaid, because obviously there's a large chunk of time between the last time there were Greek and Roman myths and the present day. So I had a lot of fun leaving stories untold in between that, so I could bring the characters forward. I know what happened to them, but the reader doesn't have to know. It may or may not be revealed further on in the series, but it was really fun making up these stories.
And it's nice to leave things there to come back to or just intrigue your readers.
Exactly.
So with using your interest in mythology, are you looking to use other areas, say Native American or even like Indian pantheon?
Yeah, actually, more of that will be brought in future books. Definitely some Native American. In the world that I've created, the gods are losing power because people don't believe in them anymore. So they're banding together to try to stand against the Abrahamic religions.
Okay.
However, they do make a note that there are still some people who worship Native American gods and Indian gods, and those families aren't willing to join them yet because they're fine by themselves. So there's a lot of factions, a lot of infighting. One of my editors referred to it as a boardroom.
Which would be appropriate for modern warfare and that type of thing. So, since we look at the art of storytelling through time, What did the Romans and Greeks use their pantheon for? As far as did they use them just the stories to illustrate with a moral, or were they using them for other ways of teaching?
I think there was a lot of not only the morals, but teaching children how they should live in their society. The things that were appreciated by the Greeks and Romans, listening to your parents. There's consequences to not listening to your parents. Obviously, the first thing that comes to mind is the whole Persephone religion, where because she eats something while she's in Hades, she can't leave it for part of the year. But I also think they told them for entertainment value. I mean, you look at one of the first stories we have extant, the Odyssey and the Iliad. Mm-hmm. There are gods in there as well, but that was obviously told as a story, as entertainment. As far as we know, I mean, we don't know for sure that that's exactly Homer's version, but mm-hmm. but storytellers told that all over the Greek and the Roman empires.
Yeah, so we know they were drawing from sources all over and then putting that together.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they do like we do in modern times, where we've got a TV series. You take a set of characters and you tell stories with that.
Exactly.
Yeah, so we're using classic storytelling, or even the classic theatrical tropes of the set of characters they have. Are you familiar with any of those, or would you be looking at some of those to bring in?
Oh, yeah. I actually have a degree in theater, so one of the things that I try really hard to bring in is the things that I learned mm-hmm. in theater. There's the traditional 5-act, 3-act structures. There are archetypes from Commedia dell'arte, from Greek and Roman theater. There's a couple of characters in, at least one character in Eye of the Storm, that almost functions as a chorus. He shows up basically to comment on things.
Which is very cool, because that's an ancient tradition, and now people are starting to play with it. I just found a book where someone has taken the first Star Wars movie, that would be the original first Star Wars movie, not the new third,
right.
And has put it and staging it as a Shakespeare play.
Oh, fabulous.
And he did a very good job with it by taking original dialogue and then putting that in there. So we nerds like to have fun with those type of things.
That sounds like fun. I'll have to look that up.
Even our own mythology, we're going to say it's open to play with.
Indeed.
Yeah, so it's nice to know that we keep up those traditions on that part of it. And not too long ago here in the Twin Cities, a local theater company likes to do classics, and they took the sequel to Oedipus Rex and set it with some rap-style lyrics and managed to fascinate teenagers from North Minneapolis.
Oh, that's fabulous.
Which to me is really cool, when you can take 2,000-year or even older stories mm-hmm. and get people hooked in modern times. So
there's actually a theater group that works in the Fringe that does Shakespearean versions of modern shows. Like one year they did something called Bard Fiction. A couple of years ago they did one called Tempests, which was basically a sequel to The Tempest, except it was aliens.
Oh, that could be fun.
I love when things get interleaved like that. The more layers there can be to a story, the more fun I can get out of it. And I feel like that way viewers or readers can pick and choose how much they want to get out of it. As long as they get 1 or 2 layers, mm-hmm. they're going to be happy. They're going to get a story. But if you like getting deeper into it, there's something there.
Yeah, it's especially fun when you're doing it, and it's fun when you're doing it as a writer as well.
Exactly.
Planning that stuff in there, because it adds to the complexity and it allows people to look at stories from multiple angles.
Right.
Which is, again, why you find the joy in mythology, because you can take the point of view of the gods themselves just trying to exist, or mm-hmm. you can switch it and have the humans watching them as theater.
Right.
And then use that kind of storytelling to make points on.
Exactly. It's a framework to talk about things that you find close to your heart. one of the things that I was really interested in doing with this book, and that's one of the reasons I ended up self-publishing it, because I didn't want to change any of it, was that I felt really strongly that it needed to be diverse. And diverse in race, sexuality, viewpoint, as global as I could get it. And you can do that with mythology in a way that doesn't feel like you're pushing the message. Again, it's those layers.
Yeah, because you can pull the gods from all over, and some of them doesn't matter which gender you cast them as, too.
Oh, yeah.
Because some of the gods have been different genders as well.
Yeah, well, the four horsemen in these books, there's 2 men and 2 women, 2 males,
Okay.
2 females, and I drew both. I've got the four horsemen, but I also have the gods that felt drawn to those roles, like Mars and Athena and Pestilence. I don't really have a god related to her.
Yeah.
But death, obviously, there's several gods that can be related to. So the theme is that those 4 are constant throughout the open pantheons of the world.
Okay, so let's just go through the 4. So we've got Mars, which is war. We have death.
We have death,
We have
pestilence,
pestilence.
and I chose to use, rather than plague, which is usually the other one,
Okay.
because I thought pestilence and plague were awfully
They
similar.
are awfully close.
I decided to go with conquest.
Ooh, okay.
Which is actually, if you go back and you look at the King James Version of the Bible, you'll see that it's mentioned conquest comes in on a white horse.
Oh, okay.
And for me, conquest is Athena. And so she's not only the goddess of justice, but the spirit of conquest. And I thought those things would go well together.
Yeah, that's very appropriate, especially since it sounds like that those 4 roles have varied in different parts of mythology.
Yeah.
So what have been some of the differences that that they've had over time?
Oh man, that's a complicated question.
Okay.
Do you mean in my story or in
just
real life?
just in mythology in general.
In mythology in general, the god of death is usually not the head of the family.
Okay.
Mostly because I feel like people are afraid of that, and they want someone higher
Okay.
to keep control over death. Like if you again look back at the Greek and Roman gods, Hades was Zeus's brother, but he was definitely at least a step below.
Yes, one of the younger brothers,
Right.
probably.
War was never in some mythologies, like the Sumerian gods, the war god was the head of the family. But I've looked at some pantheons that don't even really have a god of war. They have battle gods. Like the Celts have Morrigan, the goddess of battle, but they don't really have somebody like Mars, who was supposed to be the spirit. He was the embodiment of war. And I found that really interesting. Again, that they didn't want to make that an actual person for the most part.
Yeah, that is fascinating because it also looks upon philosophies of some of those societies and cultures as well.
Studying mythology will tell you a huge amount about the culture that it comes from, whether they follow it or not anymore. It's something that still is a resonance in their culture, and it's also a resonance in the stories themselves. It tells you something about them.
Yeah, and that's one of the challenges we face as, seculars and as humanists, is that we don't have this great set of characters that sort of come with our story.
True.
And so then that's part of our challenge, is helping sort of create a history. We can do that by just looking at actual history.
Right.
And even, looking at, we had P.Z. Myers come talk to our group, talk about the unsung heroes. Those are the ones back in history whose gene is one that stuck through and kept this line going through time.
Right.
Those are some of the things, but it's hard to get those stories to resonate. So do you have an idea on what we can do as that? I know that's a big picture question.
Well, one of the things to me that is kind of the stripped down framework of mythology is Joseph Campbell, the hero of many faces. And you can kind of pare that down to stories like the King Arthur mythology, the Lord of the Rings.
Yep. And classics like Robin Hood, which is a big favorite of mine.
Exactly. Whether they're real or not doesn't matter. In fact, I think it resonates more if they weren't.
Yeah.
Because you can tell the story you want to tell without having to worry about destroying history.
Exactly. Yeah, that's why King Arthur and Robin Hood for the English are very strong stories for them, because the closer you get to them when you go into history, the more smoky they get.
Right.
And they start to disappear. And whereas here in America, we've got a number of ones we can steal from ones we immigrated with, or we can also work to integrate in Native American.
Right.
Yeah, so we have those challenges. So, there we can essentially, it sounds like a good idea is just to pick and choose and enjoy using those to tell our points.
That's how I feel. It's freeing to be an atheist in a world full of mythological stories, because you can pick and choose whichever ones you want. And if you don't like the way they are, well, then change them. It doesn't matter.
And we wouldn't be the first ones doing that either, because when
Right.
you go back and look at them, the cultures would modify those stories. So
Oh, yeah.
it goes back to the ancient tradition of writers. It's like, okay, you guys have done it that way. I'm going to do it different.
Exactly. I mean, Shakespeare stole from the best.
Yeah,
so
he
why
stole
not?
from everybody, and people continue to steal from him, and other writers will borrow, will continue to do that. And it's a time-honored tradition.
Exactly.
So where can people find you on the web?
My website is at aikuzenski.com. You can find my book at Amazon
Okay.
and Barnes & Noble online. We're working on getting it into Barnes & Noble stores in physical form.
As in the paper book in the brick and mortar store.
Exactly. And they'll also be available in several indie bookstores around Minneapolis.
Excellent. So you're getting it out. And then do you blog or anything like that as well?
I do. I have a blog at my website. I have a Twitter page. I have a Facebook page. I have all of the social medias.
So people can get a hold of you through your social media.
Exactly.
Thank you very much. This has been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
And for more information on us, the Humanists of Minnesota, you can go to our website at humanistofmn.org. You can find contact information for us. You can send us a letter through the mail or send us an email. We'd like to hear what you think of this program and about topics you'd like to see us cover in the future. So thank you for joining me on this edition of Humanist Views. I'm Scott Lohman. Good night.